Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari. Yashoda Nandana Rajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Rajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tirambanachari Jamuna Tirambanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Vallabha Giridhari. Yashoda Nandana Rajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Rajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tirambanachari Jamuna Tirambanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giridhari. Gaura Premanandi Ibo. Please. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devyam Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet Nasta Prayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Good morning, everyone. Haribol. We're reading from chapter 23 of the 10th canto. And text 35. 34? 34? 35.
Prabhu, we can read any text. I mean, we just started this chapter. So.
Okay, they're just starting it, or they've been reading for a while?
We just started, Prabhu. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if anybody can hear me. Okay.
Yes, Prem Prabhuji, we are able to hear you.
All right, so we'll tell you verse 6. So Krishna has, the cowherd boys have been hungry, and Krishna has sent them to ask the Brahmins for prasad. Okay. Text 6. Hey Bhumi Devas Srinuta Krishna Syadesha Karinaha Praptan Janita Bhadrambo Gopano Ramachoditam Hey Bhumi Devasanuta Krishna Syadeshakarina Praptan Janita Bhadrambha Gopana Ramachoditam. Please chant. Hey Bhumi Devasrinuta Syadeshakarinaha Bhajam Panita Bhadrambo Gopano Ramachoditam. Hey Bhumi Devasrinuta Krishna Syadeshakarinaha Bhadrambo. Okay. Hey Bhumi Deva, O earthly gods, Shrinuta, please hear us. Krishnasya, Adesha, by the order of Krishna. Karinaha, the executors. Praptan, arrived. Janita, please recognize. Bhadram, all good. Vaha, unto you. Gopan, cowherd boys. Naha, us. Ramachoditan, sent by Lord Ram. Cowherd boys said, O earthly gods, please hear us. We cowherd boys are executing the orders of Krishna, and we have been sent here by Balaram. We wish all good for you. Please acknowledge our arrival. Report. The term Bhumi Dev, or gods on earth, refers here to the Brahmins who are supposed to closely represent the will of the Supreme Lord. The philosophy of Krishna consciousness is not a primitive polytheistic doctrine holding that human beings on earth are gods. Rather, it is a science that traces the descent of authority from the Supreme Absolute himself, Sri Krishna. The authority and power of God naturally extend along with the extension of his creation. And on the earth, the Lord's will and authority are represented by purified, enlightened men called Brahmins. This account will illustrate that the ritualistic Brahmins approached by the cowherd boys were not at all properly enlightened and thus could not appreciate the position of Krishna and Balaram, or that of their intimate associates. In fact, this pastime exposes the pretentious position of so-called Brahmins who are not faithful devotees of the Supreme Lord. Right, thank you. Let me move this over just a little bit so I don't have to twist to look quite so much. Okay, thank you. I want to welcome all the Columbus devotees online here, Prem Sindhu and crew. So this morning's meeting is very auspicious because this is the exact day that Srila Prabhupada came to Columbus in 1969, May 9th, or at least was here speaking. And on this auspicious occasion, we can meditate on the meaning of Srila Prabhupada's mission. He was coming Nirvishesha Shunyavadi, the Western countries, deliver the Western countries from this impersonalism and voidism. People are impersonal and void, or voidists and impersonalists because they don't really know the difference. They don't understand. They're not conscientiously following Shankara philosophy, but they either have no conception of God or an impersonal idea. And no conception of God means voidism. That life came from nothing, it ends in nothing, it has no meaning. And impersonalism means maybe there's a God, and whatever he is, whoever he is, please give us our daily bread. So I like this phrase in the purport about how Krishna consciousness is the science of how authority descends from the supreme absolute truth. And so authority is not hierarchical. In other words, real authority. In an organization, there's this hierarchy of positions. And you ever heard of the Peter principle? This is a popular study back in the 70s that people will, in a hierarchical organization, they'll continue being promoted. They do a good job, they'll be promoted. They do a good job, they'll be promoted. And they'll be eventually promoted to a position in which they cannot do a good job. And so they're holding on to a position that they're incompetent to fill. Then they won't get promoted anymore. But basically, everybody is incompetent up and down the chain, risen to their level of incompetence. This is the Peter principle. So in spiritual hierarchy, in an organization, there does have to be a hierarchy. But it is not that having a position in the hierarchy carries with it intrinsic spiritual authority. Let's put it that way. A spiritual authority is a different thing. It really has to be earned. It has to be demonstrated. In other words, the principle of acharya applies. And one cannot preach to others to do something that one is not doing oneself. And so even if one has a hierarchical position, if they're not practicing what they're preaching, then their authority is actually null. There is no real authority. Srila Prabhupada used the example of his disciples who are distributing books. He said, you must read the books, not that you go out and sell them and say, here, read this wonderful book. I don't personally read it, but you should read it. So the practice of Krishna consciousness depends on our personal commitment. And then that authority actually flows from the Supreme Lord. We read in the Chaitanya Charitamrita about how Lord Chaitanya was just observed by local people, and they would become empowered to share Krishna consciousness with others just by seeing him. Krishnadas Kaviraj says that just by seeing Lord Chaitanya, children, old men, women, everyone became empowered in Krishna consciousness, and then went out and empowered others. So last night, Prem Sindhu Prabhu was asking a very good question, discussing the position of a devotee who is practicing Krishna consciousness to challenge themselves. Should we challenge ourselves? How much should we challenge ourselves? How much should we be dissatisfied with the degree of advancement that we have made? There is always room for improvement. It said that's the biggest room in the world, the room for improvement. And that question, a very good question that you asked Prem Sindhu Prabhu, got me reflecting on Srila Prabhupada's life and legacy, how he was traveling. We were reading yesterday how he would travel around the world, come back to Los Angeles, rest up, travel around the world again, rest up, travel around the world again. These year-long trips with many, many stops. And he had a very strong sense of urgency. For him, it was, you remember, he almost passed away coming over. Then he almost passed away again in New York. And so for him, every day was a precious opportunity to serve his Guru Maharaj's order. Things were different in that context, I just have to say, because Prabhupada had very limited time and he had a lot he wanted to do. So he was acting in a very creative way, going to new places and giving the devotees lifelong memories and impressions that they cherish to this day, and that we all cherish hearing about. So that was his particular position, and Krishna empowered him to fulfill that role. So there are two things in regards to the spiritual master. There is anucharam and anusaram. Anucharam means to follow in the footsteps. No, I always get that confused. Anusaram, sorry. Anusaram means to take the essence, right? Sara, the Sara. Anucharam means to imitate. Imitation. So we cannot imitate the empowered acharyas. We cannot claim to do what Srila Prabhupada did. And yet, the essence of what he did is our responsibility to carry on. So in those days, it was really Srila Prabhupada and no other mature devotees. The elders, the great elders in the movement were 30, 31, and they'd been practicing for 5, 8 years. And were, in many respects, not that far along in their maturity. Now we have a different situation. We have devotees who've been practicing many decades, who've had life experience, which the young people then lacked, and are in a better position to teach Krishna consciousness from a point of experience. And those devotees are very helpful, very valuable. The urgency that Prabhupada had is, in one respect, it's still there because this world is a flaming mess and desperate for Krishna consciousness. But to maintain the movement and to maintain our own practices and our own service is our challenge. Maintaining is now maintaining what Prabhupada has given us. He requested that even if we can't expand what he has given us, we should at least maintain it. So that's our first order of business. And maintaining something and expanding it urgently are two different modes of devotional service. These modes are described in the third canto of the Bhagavatam. There is devotional service in the mode of goodness, the mode of passion, and it's all devotional service. So what is important for us is to be able to maintain our spiritual lives. I'm reminded of Srila Prabhupada, who was asked, "What would your mother say if she could see you today?" To which he responded, "She would simply be glad to see that I am alive." So similarly, what would Srila Prabhupada say about our Krishna consciousness movement today? Well, he would be glad to see that it's alive. Because there was no guarantee that ISKCON would continue after Prabhupada's departure. This is why he separated the book publication arm from the religious organization, you could say. So we certainly have our troubles, but we also have kept it together to some extent. There's plenty of room to improve it and make it better. What concerns me sometimes in my service at Krishna House is I see young men and women who really are very anxious to do something and to make advancement and really want to set the world on fire. And often those are the ones who have a hard time maintaining. So this is why slow and steady can be preferable to a false sense of urgency. If one can maintain a sense of urgency, it's certainly appropriate because there is an urgent need for Krishna consciousness. But maintenance is our first responsibility. If we can maintain, then we're in a position to expand. If we try to expand and we can't maintain, then we lose both. Like Chanakya Pandit said, one who gives up something certain for something uncertain very often loses both the certain and the uncertain. spiritual life is the long haul. It stretches over many, many years. Although Srila Prabhupada said we could be Krishna conscious in a moment, or it may take you 1,000,000 years. We'd like to be somewhere in the middle. About one lifetime. We give this one lifetime to Krishna. And Prabhupada said, you've had so many lifetimes. Just give this one lifetime to Krishna. In 1975, one of my mentors, Satsarup Maharaj, had a mobile home. He got a motor home. It was a new renovation. Formerly, devotees had used buses and vans, which were not really meant for living on. But he and his small party got a little motor home, and he was thinking, I'm a sannyasi, but I'm traveling around in this motor home. So he asked Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada came to see it. He stepped on, he said, oh, it is like a little house. And Satsarup Maharaj asked him, is this appropriate for a sannyasi? Is it overindulgent? No. And Prabhupada said, keep yourself comfortable so that you can work nicely. And that was his instruction. So after Tamal Krishna Maharaj accepted sannyas, he made a plan to go out on a walking tour of South India like Lord Chaitanya. He's just going to go take his danda and begging pot and go. I thought that was the dharma for a sannyas. And Prabhupada heard this plan. He said, no. Get a bus, go and do programs. So in that respect, I'm reminded of these Brahmins who have taken their spiritual life in an extreme direction. They have committed themselves to the ritualistic practice of the Vedic literatures and yamas and niyamas to the point where they have been blinded to Krishna's presence and Krishna's appearance. So the pastime is beautiful and obviously obvious in its message. How the simple wives who did not know the Vedic rituals have appreciated Krishna, and proving once and for all that women are more intelligent than men. The direction of our spiritual progress can be invested in things that please Krishna or things that we think might please Krishna or we suspect would please Krishna. And this is the real point of the chapter. What is it Krishna actually wants? Like we read such heavy verses in Bhagavad Gita, especially chapter 2, about the Vedas, because Arjuna's initial proposal is, I want to renounce the battle because that's the Vedic thing to do. I want to go to a higher plane. I want to do something better than this gross fighting. I want to be a renunciate. I want to be a sadhu. And Krishna is not buying it. So he chastises Arjuna, saying you're caught up in this concept of Vedic rituals that is preventing you from seeing the reality around you. He calls it a forest of delusion. Very strong words. You know, when your mind is no longer bewildered by these Vedic injunctions, when you've passed through this forest of delusion, then you'll be able to understand what is actually appropriate for your situation. So our progress in spiritual life is not measured by how many shlokas we know or how many mantras we can recite or how many rituals we can perform. It's really characterized by how much we are conscious of what will please Krishna in a given situation, and then executing that. And we can't claim to know what is Krishna's desire in every situation. But to the best of our ability, if that's the question on our mind, how can I best please Krishna at this moment under these circumstances? That is the urgency. That's the way, that's the room for growth as a devotee. Everybody's situation is very different. So you can't say one size fits all. But in this case, for example, Krishna and his associates were hungry. I mean, what will please Krishna more than bringing him prasad? The Brahmins could have just stopped the ritual on then and there, say, Krishna, here, take it all, take all the all the prasad, and they would have been glorified. But they didn't. They felt, nope, we have to stick to these rituals, and therefore they did not understand what was actually Krishna's desire. So Srila Prabhupada has left it clear. What is Krishna's desire? First of all, that we practice Krishna consciousness, that we stay alive in our spiritual life, that we just continue with the simple practices that allow us to progress every day. One of the biggest questions I get from devotees is that I don't feel like I'm advancing fast enough. And I explain to them that this is because we start off with a special introductory offer from Krishna when we first start chanting. We very rapidly make progress. And then we come to the clearing stage, which is a long, drawn-out process of purification. So the initial stages are like the airplane taking off. We feel the pressure, we feel the speed. But then when we're airborne, it feels like we're standing still. If it weren't for the clouds outside or various landmarks, we couldn't tell we're moving at all. In fact, when you're in a cloud bank, you can't see anything in any direction. It just feels like you're sitting still and there's some weird rumbling in the back. So the clearing stage is like that, where it appears that we're standing still. And yet, in fact, if we put our head out the window, we would realize how fast we're going. So if we get complacent in our practices and think, I'm not making an advancement, let me just put that aside for a while. Then very quickly we'll realize the impact of the material energy again. So Krishna, the basic sadhana gives us a vaccination, a bubble, a cocoon, a protection from the influence of the material energy. And sustaining that for a lifetime is our challenge. So it may be appropriate in this ashram or that ashram, it may be appropriate in this vocation or that vocation. It really doesn't matter very much what else you're doing. If your sadhana is sound in the morning, if you have chanted 16 rounds or close to it and you're keeping the regulative principles, you can endure a lot of interaction with the material energy if necessary. Then the chutney with the meal is preaching. Just a little bit of preaching. The chutney, yeah, that's what gives it the taste. What do you think I said? The chutney. Okay, good. Yes, then from that position of regular sadhana, if we do some kind of outreach, try to extend ourselves to others. It will be easier for some than others to do that. But everybody, to some extent, whatever extent they can. Yaridaha Tahika Krishna Upadesh, Amara Gai Guru Hoitare. Try to share Krishna consciousness with others. That's what gives life to our sadhana practice. If we're going to expand or to increase and avoid complacency, we have to do some kind of sharing of Krishna consciousness. That's the point. It doesn't have to be on Prabhupada's scale. It can't be. When Prabhupada came here, they had a huge gathering in an auditorium at Ohio State. Hitchcock Hall. It was hundreds of kids, right? I'm not sure if I've been in that hall. I don't know if it could hold 2,000 people. It didn't seem that big. If it did, they were standing on top of each other. But it was packed and they were dancing. And, that impact that Prabhupada had was just because of this hierarchy of authority. He had so much, so dear to Krishna. Krishna was empowering him by inspiring all of these people to come and see him and all of these people to come and chant. We can look at that and think, how could we do that? And the answer is we can't, but we don't need to. It's not our responsibility to do that. Our responsibility is first of all, make sure that we are stable and keeping ourselves nicely in Krishna consciousness. And then we can distribute some books. We can do a small program. We can do our part according to our ability to continue that service that Srila Prabhupada has said. He would say very challenging things to us. he'd say, you know, you should do 10 times more than I did. And when he was building the temple in Mayapur, the long building, he wanted 3 8-hour shifts a day. He said, that's the American way. 3 8-hour shifts a day. He said, my body is Indian, but my ideas are all American. 3 8-hour shifts a day. And if you can't, what is the use of your being Americans if you can't do something wonderful for Krishna? So he was pushing. He was pushing. But then many of those devotees did wonderfully for some time, but then they could not maintain their spiritual lives. So at the end of his time with us physically, Srila Prabhupada wanted to come back to Gita Nagari to show people how to live off the land. Why is that? Because his brahmachari disciples, his single young men and women disciples, were having, in many cases, a hard time maintaining their spiritual lives. And the ashram for maintenance is grihastha ashram. That's the majority of one's life generally. So as Akendra Prabhu puts it, now I'm doing 25 to life. That's fine. That's all right. It's a position of maintaining our Krishna consciousness. That's what's important. So better to be steady in that respect. And not one other thing related to this chapter that causes devotees anxiety in maintaining is this sense of progress being related to more ritual and more ornate deity seva at home, more pakka practices, and which is great. I mean, it's great to be pakka, but if they start piling up on top of each other, you have to put on tilak in this way, you have to do your offering in that way, you have to do these extra artis every day. Sometimes this can be a great source of anxiety for devotees because it's more than they can handle, and then when they can't handle it, they feel fallen. So it's wise not to overburden ourselves, to be able to say no if we're asked to something that's excessive, to be able to draw the line and say, look, this is a standard I can maintain nicely. I'm not going to try to increase it artificially. If we want to increase anything, try to increase our outreach. And the ways we outreach, aside from the obvious ones, doing books or distributing flyers or holding programs, is to maintain relationships with interested new people. To keep in touch with them, reach out to them. I'm reminded of my departed dear friend Gunagrahi Maharaj. He was a drummer, and he got a little interested in Krishna consciousness. Not much, but a little. But the temple president in Buffalo, Trivikram Swami, and used to call him up, say, hey, George, we need somebody to play drums for our kirtan today. Can you come out? So he'd come and he'd just slap the mridanga, and he was like a gig. Try and help out some friends with a gig. Yeah, no interest at first, but then through that engagement, he developed his interest. When the Gita, Krishna says, "Na buddhi bedam janayad," when we talk about that sense of urgency, that can sometimes work against us if we're too impatient with people to become Krishna conscious. If we push them uncomfortably. Rather, we don't want to disturb their minds. We want to engage them in works of devotion. So this is this. Can you bring some prasadam? Can you bring something for the deities? Or can you join us for this program tonight? Or just to call, how are you doing? How are things going? How is your chanting? What can I do to help you? Just showing that we care. The Baptists have a saying, they don't care what you know until they know that you care. So serving the disciplic succession means to actually effectively reach people so that they also want to take part. Not that we just repeat what we've heard, that's all that matters. You don't like it, you're going to hell, you're no good. I have no time for you. This is more along the lines of the Brahmins, the ritualistic Brahmins. We're just repeating it and let it go where it may. That was the best we could do maybe 40 years ago. And Prabhupada encouraged that because he didn't want a lot of speculation. But again, with time, we should learn how to be able to present Krishna consciousness and treat people in a way that actually inspires them and brings them forward. There's a Bengali saying, because I ran naked as a baby, does that mean I should run naked now? So Prabhupada said, assimilate and present in your own words. And he said, the true follower, my true follower is what? Perfect gentleman. So a gentleman will not put others in anxiety. A gentleman will not make others turned away by dogma. Rather, a gentleman will try to understand the other person and compassionately introduce Krishna consciousness as a solution to their problem. So I'll stop there. If that is all right. Any questions or comments? Anything in the chat? Yes, the type of book. Yeah, let's. Hmm. 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 Yes, yes, that's a very important realization, because the ability to stay in Krishna consciousness will be enhanced by that. Under every circumstance, we try to understand what is Krishna's desire, what is the best thing to do, how can I best serve? And the more we can make those decisions based on our spiritual experience, the better. If we don't know, we have to ask. That's all right. It's good to ask. But progress in spiritual life means that more and more we understand how Krishna is pleased. That allows our individual relationship with Krishna to manifest more and more. If we are not, unless we're offending devotees, our native intelligence is generally a good guide for making spiritual decisions. But if we're offending devotees by our actions, then we know this is off track. Yeah. Right, how to distinguish between native intelligence and the mind? A good question. Experience primarily. Like if we're very convinced that something is Krishna's desire and then we do it and it turns out to be a dead end for us, then that helps us distinguish, okay, this was my mental concoction about what Krishna wanted as opposed to what he really wanted. I had an idea of, when I was a brahmachari, I wanted to go and preach in Japan. I mean, no particular reason, just it seemed like exciting, see the world. No qualification, didn't know Japanese like our friend Caleb. And I was pretty sure, yeah, this is what Krishna wants me to do because I feel it. Okay. And then my mentor said, well, how practical is that? You can reach people here right now, or you could go to this strange environment and try to pioneer or try to learn the language. But what you're doing here is useful. What you're doing there is questionable. To give up something certain for something uncertain might lose you both. That's what happens is if we get attached to some idea that, yeah, I got to do it for Krishna, and then it doesn't work out, that can really undermine our spiritual life. Then we doubt our perceptions, and then we just question the whole perception of practicing Krishna consciousness. You see, this is why acting on the mental platform is so detrimental. So how do we distinguish? The practical answer to that is to get input from other people. Yeah, I have this idea. What do you think of it? Because people outside of our mental bubble will have more objectivity. It's very frustrating for me sometimes as in my service when young men and women get a very hard head and definitely want to do something which to me makes no sense. And I even fear it's going to hurt them in their spiritual lives, which often happens. So we can only, do our best to encourage people in the right way or in constructive ways. And generally, constructive ways means just like be patient, tone it down, don't rush. And this is why I was answering your question, Prem Sindhu Prabhu, like that. Because I see a lot of the opposite. And anyway, that's the gist of it. Okay, I hope that. Oh yes, I was remembering Prabhupada was once asked a series of questions, detailed questions about Tulsi Devi. A devotee, sincere devotee, sent a list of 20 questions or so, and Prabhupada went through and answered them. But one question was something about her care. Was for this, use your common sense, and if you don't have any, find somebody who does. Not so common. Yes, not so common. It is. But common sense in serving Krishna means just what is practical for me to do? What is realistic? I may not be able to progress 100% today, but if I can progress 5% and do that every day, right? That mathematical example is given. The rich man died and he had 2 sons and he had a large estate. So he offered one son, he said, you can take $5 million or you can take a penny a day and it'll double for a month. And so the first son said, I'll take the $5 million. The second son said, I'll take the penny a day. Why? Because that penny a day doubles, it's something like $20 or $30 million or more by the end of a month. So a little bit of steady progress may appear to be inferior to doing something spectacular right away. But over time, that steady progress allows us to stay, allows us to grow, and it allows Krishna to work through us more and more because we're on a good, solid platform. Okay, so there's the mind will tell us Krishna will be pleased by this, but then we can borrow some intelligence from others if need be to be sure. Okay, other comments or thoughts?
Yes.
Anything on Skype call?
Okay, Shrestha?
How to stay encouraged while doing outreach? The response can be discouraging, and you sometimes question your service.
Yes.
How to stay encouraged?
How to stay encouraged in outreach, which is a very good question. Of course, we know Srila Prabhupada was once invited to a program, the devotees in New York, where we're attempting to reach a higher end audience. They rented a big hall and they advertised like crazy, and very few people showed up. And so they spent a month's rent on it, renting this hall for one night, thinking that would really boost things. But to them, it was a total failure. And they apologized to Srila Prabhupada. What do you mean? You didn't see Narada Muni was there? Lord Brahma was there? And they asked, what were they doing? And they said they were laughing like anything to see the Malechas chanting Hare Krishna. As Edison said when he was trying to discover what material would work in a light bulb and found that 1,000 materials that failed. he was asked, "Aren't you discouraged?" And he said, "No, I just found 1,000 things that won't work." So we can try things and know that the effort is our purification. You understand? That therefore there's no loss in the effort, even if it doesn't bring a big result. We have tried something meaningful, and sometimes we have failures. Look at Prabhupada's life; so many failures from a just external point of view. Right? He tried Jhansi. Jhansi was a big thing to him. This little town where he had some followers and he had some momentum, and then he got this building, but then he lost the building. It would have been so easy for him to just quit, because his big vision didn't. But he would say, no, Krishna must have some other plan, which obviously he did. Suppose he'd been successful there in Jhansi. He may still have been there the rest of his life. But Krishna had other plans. So we should know that we have the right to fire our arrows in preaching, but the results are up to Krishna. Sometimes we'll be successful and sometimes not. There's no loss. Okay. Yes, I think this is what Prem Sindhu Prabhu was implying. Yes, we if we're maintaining, then we can easily become lazy. If we're maintaining nicely, it's beyond laziness. Let's put it that way. To maintain nicely means to rise before the sun and to chant 16 rounds if we're so committed, or whatever number we're committed to. And to hear Bhagavatam, and if possible to perform kirtan. You do all that before most of your neighbors have gotten up. Right? You can't really call that person lazy, provided they're working during the day. They haven't just given up work. There's a saying in India called a sadhana bum. Some temples, the brahmacharis live there, and their duty is to go to the arti, and their duty is to take prasad, and that's pretty much their duty. And they don't do any preaching. They don't share Krishna consciousness. They don't share their spiritual life, let's say, with others. But they're there as like formal ritualistic priests. They may do yajnas and artis and so forth. But for us, very few of us are going to live in temples. Our laziness could be measured by our willingness to share Krishna consciousness in some way. Because when we share it, the supply multiplies, right? So we should not be lazy in the matter of cooking and the matter of preaching. Yes. Prabhupada said that anyone can cook except a lazy man. But that means, in other words, it's convenience foods, and if we have time and facility, we should actually make a nice offering for Krishna. That's an example of laziness versus Krishna conscious thinking. What will please Krishna the most right now? So I hope that addresses your question. Laziness, yes, and ease of life don't go well with spiritual life. What will happen if we're genuinely lazy and we're genuinely taking it too easy? We'll stop chanting. We'll just say, it's too much trouble. And that can happen, that we just become complacent. So that, to me, is the measure. It's the tipping point. We have a sadhana in the morning, we're likely to feel the enthusiasm to want to do some service for Krishna. If we've chanted, we've begged Krishna, please engage me, we've heard, then we want to do some service naturally. Then we're spiritually healthy. It's like when old people die, they generally die because they just sleep more. and the body just kind of winds down. That's what happens, to the point where you just can't do anything. So we can fight that inertia if we have the spiritual strength. Sleep is death, Prabhupada said. it's inevitable. It happens to everybody unless we get run over by a bus or something. But should we live so long, we'll die that way. Where we're no longer able to get up and no longer able to feed ourselves, no longer able to take care of ourselves just like little babies. That's what we have to look forward to. Yes.
Prabhu, you can go ahead. Question.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Thank you. Very wonderful class. So we're talking about over endeavor in spiritual life, and you were talking about some devotees who are very enthusiastic and they cannot sustain it. So how do we really know where we are over endeavoring in spiritual life, and how can that be an obstacle to spiritual progress? And can you give some examples of over endeavor if it's possible? Like, so just.
Yes. Yeah, we can know if we're over endeavoring if we are anxious about some particular project that was not given to us or asked of us, or maybe it was and we've taken it without feeling 100% comfortable with it, you know, in the name of pushing ourselves. Anxiety for Krishna is good to a limited degree, but if it's too much anxiety, it's that it puts us in distress over a sustained period. That's not good. So there are many examples of this from the early days of ISKCON. Srila Prabhupada asked a lot of his disciples, and his disciples were very eager, but then sometimes they would go gangbusters for a while and then they'd be gone. And they just could no longer maintain the pace. That's why maintenance, what we can comfortably do for an extended time is the most important measure. I'm remembering one example from Gainesville of a young man. The devotees had just arrived there at the campus at the University of Florida, and they were doing kirtan. And one student became very interested, and he was coming a lot. So this was 1 month before the student was scheduled to graduate with a pre-med degree. And the devotees said, school's Maya. He said, yeah, you're right. So he dropped out with 1 month to go. And he was a very enthusiastic devotee, and he was a brahmachari, and then he took sannyas. He became Prabhupada's servant. You know, he was a real luminary amongst the devotees. But then after Prabhupada's departure, he went back to medical school and got his degree and became a brain surgeon. And he wrote that I'm sitting here doing brain surgery and I'm wondering, what am I doing? So he was always conflicted. He remained a devotee and active to some extent, but that great hill and valley kind of thing was totally unnecessary. Had he been mentored in a more sattvic way. But the urgency, the passion, the push of those inexperienced devotees led him into this spiritual life that was really unnecessarily disruptive for him. His natural position would have been to be a professional, a physician, a grihasta, and that would have been stable for him through his life. Maybe then later he could have taken sannyas. He's passed away now. But he had many challenges in his spiritual life as a result of this. So this is just one example. I'm reflecting from my perspective, from the early days, and your perspective is much different because you are, I assume most of the people I'm speaking to are professionals, you're established, you're grihastas, you have done things in your life in a systematic and meaningful way, and then added Krishna consciousness whenever you discovered it and you're practicing it diligently. That position is actually very strong. It's much stronger. And the best way to expand it, as I was mentioning, is through adding some preaching and outreach. That's what keeps spiritual life fresh. Vidya vadhu jivanam. As you have the knowledge, But without Sankirtan, there's no vadhu, there's no wife. And it's the wife who brings happiness and meaning to the husband. Otherwise, it is dry. So vidya vadhu jivanam, the life and the wife of transcendental knowledge, what Chaitanya very poetically said. Now, where do we over endeavor to preach? If it's causing us to compromise our personal sadhana, that's a definite sign it's over endeavor. If it's causing us anxiety and putting us in stress for a sustained period of time, maybe a week or two before a big festival or something, but on and on. Oh, I just really I gotta do this. I gotta do this. I gotta do this, and I hardly have time for. This is not sustainable. In the 6th chapter, Krishna says that yuktahara viharasya yukta chetasya karmashu. So one who is temperate and regulated, moderate, eating, sleeping, work, and recreation, vihar is also an important part of maintaining. So every devotee needs some recreation. It needs a hobby. It needs something that just brings joy, and it needs to make time to do that. So these are some measures. I hope that will address your question, how we can tell if we're over endeavoring. That's it.
So, can I say something?
Sugandha Mataji, you can go next.
Premasanta Prabhu wants to say something.
Please go ahead. Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay. So the vihar part, I was thinking about the recreation part. That's always a little bit. I was thinking, what is that recreation? Because sometimes we say, let's say I like to play some sport. Prabhupada says, yeah, that comes in the category of wasting time, also frivolous waste of time, the sports and things like that. So what would you say? Some devotees say walking. I think in the Surrender Unto Me, that book by Burijan Prabhu, he writes that for devotees, walking considered recreation. But can it go beyond the boundaries of Krishna consciousness, the recreation, and what exactly that recreation?
Yes, I know Srila Prabhupada made that statement about sports as frivolous activities. But if something can be used in Krishna's service, it must be used. So at Krishna House, for example, the young men and women really enjoy going out and playing soccer. So we can say, oh, it's a frivolous sport, don't do it. But I see practically that when they go out and play soccer, they come back enlivened. And when they're enlivened, then they're more receptive to hearing and chanting. So it could be construed as frivolous and beyond the definition of recreation. But from my point of view, it helps enhance their Krishna consciousness. Just knowing that I don't have to give up things that I enjoy doing in order to please Krishna. So my concept, Prem Sindhu Prabhu, of recreation has expanded since I've been at Krishna House. Not expanded to the point where I'm playing soccer. But I have a group of men we meet once a week, and have been doing this for over almost 30 years now, a men's group. Every Tuesday night we just get together, we do a little kirtan, we do a little reading, we share how our weeks are going, and once in a while we go bowling, or once in a while we play volleyball. And that gives us, it just is like energizing for the week. So in my own life, I've experienced how these things are not necessarily bad. They're not inherently bad in and of themselves. I had one of our godbrothers, Danavir Maharaj, was a very highly placed volleyball player. He was, top flight in the American college system. And he met his old friend one night in Los Angeles, who had become a devotee, and he told him all about Krishna consciousness. And he had a big match the next day, and he went for his match, and he looked at the volleyball and he said, "What am I doing?" and he just dropped it and walked off the court, went to the temple. So there are examples of those who, will not touch a volleyball or a bowling ball or a basketball in the name of Prabhupada. No, this is frivolous. This is against the regulator principles. Personally, I just don't believe that's necessary. I think that's extreme. I think that's more like the Brahmins than their wives. It's not going to hurt you. Just to expand this a little bit, from my experience, Krishna is more interested in what we do than what we don't do. In other words, I'm pleasing Krishna by not playing volleyball. Okay, but he's more interested in, I'm pleasing Krishna by offering some nice prasad, or it's not nice boga, or I'm pleasing Krishna by distributing a book. He sees the things we do. He's not so concerned about the things that we do that might be helpful for our maintaining our balance in life. He doesn't say, "Oh, there's a volleyball player, you're going to hell. There's another birth for you." My sense is he doesn't see that. He sees the offerings that we make, and he sees the chanting that we do. He doesn't see if, somebody's watching a movie, oh, hell for you. It's not that strict if we're going to maintain Krishna consciousness for a lifetime. So doing some recreational things, some things that maybe relax us or bring us some joy, it's not going to make us fall down. It's not going to just make us be in violation of the regulator principles. I'm just speaking my realization. I'm sure Bhakti Vikash Maharaj would have something else to say. So different people have different takes on it, and that's part of the beauty of devotional service. From my point of view, it's fine to just kind of be ourselves and do our best to please Krishna from that position. Okay.
May I add something to this?
Please add. Yes.
Just a couple of weeks ago, we had this discussion with His Grace Hare Krishna Prabhu. In that he was we were discussing something similar, and he categorized the activities into three ways. Like, one is devotional activities, then there is non-devotional activities, and then the third is anti-devotional activities. Mm-hmm. So when you have, and all of these three things can be offered to Krishna. So now he said that, okay, how can you offer devotional activities? Obviously, by keeping Krishna in the center, now it's offered. For the non-devotional activities, so he quoted a verse from Rupa Goswami. So there is a verse which you can, like, anything which is non-devotional activities, like playing sports or watching, some sports, or watching movie, something like that, which is not related to Krishna consciousness directly. So that also can be offered. So the activity itself can be offered to Krishna. Then there is anti-devotional activities, which is like against the four regulative principles. And when someone is doing that, so the activities cannot be offered because it's against Krishna's will. But the desire to perform those activities can be offered. The attachment to the performing of that activities can be offered. That Krishna, take this attachment that I have. I don't want to do it, but I'm doing it. But please take this attachment to this activity.
Interesting.
So these three ways he categorized that how you can still keep Krishna in those activities.
Very interesting. Wow, that's, in one sense, that's more extreme than what I'm saying. But yes, I appreciate that point, that we are, like, if something relaxes us and we're relaxing for Krishna. Okay, why are we relaxing? So that we can be recharged for our service. So the activity itself may be non-devotional, but the purpose of doing it can be devotional. Yeah. So the anti-devotional activities, that is very strong. But I do agree with what he says. That's more applicable for the newcomer. Obviously, if somebody is initiated and taken vows, then you can't really offer anti-devotional activities anymore. That attachment should have been dealt with before initiation. But Prabhupada said something in that vein, that if an alcoholic is drinking wine. All right, Krishna, I'm drinking this wine for you. Better that than to think, I don't want to be seen. This point about non-devotional activities and recreation, it's really important because it helps us, allow us to be ourselves for Krishna. And not think, okay, I have to act in a certain way to give her this facade of being Krishna conscious, when in fact I'm doing these other things I don't want anyone to know about. See, that's very unhealthy. Spiritual life. What is healthy is we can just have integrity in our lives and be an open book. And like Prabhupada's life was an open book, and he was so pure. We may not be that pure, but doesn't help to hide this and hide that. See? So better to just do those things that we enjoy, that keep us balanced and happy, even if they're not considered the most exalted. I was remembering Tamal Krishna Maharaj in Dallas. He was a very, very strict sannyasi. Then when he started initiating disciples and they were householders, he kind of broadened his horizons a little bit. So when it was Super Bowl Sunday, he said, everyone come and watch it in my room. You're all going to be watching it anyway. We might as well watch it together. And this made him very beloved to his disciples, that he accepted them where they were and as they were. And therefore they were very loyal and they were very steady. They didn't feel, I don't want Gurudev to know this, I don't want Gurudev to know that. Yes. It's natural. It's part of life. Part of life. Yeah. Isn't it the soccer games at Krishna House uplift everybody? Unless you tear a ligament.
You see the human side.
Mm-hmm.
For me as a leader, that was important, because people would tell me, oh, okay, I can see that you or Sadhu, who is the director there, oh, you guys can actually do this, and you can have fun, and we would do improv games, and we were just like overjoyed with happiness and doing those kind of activities.
Yes.
It all became a lot more connected, I felt. Specifically.
Yeah, I agree. That puts it very nicely. Yes. It's profoundly important for new devotees, particularly from the non-Hindu backgrounds, to have that sense of being able to be themselves in association of devotees. Oh, I don't have to. They're giving up a lot. Intoxication, illicit sex, meat eating. But if they can still have fun with non-devotional activities, that makes Krishna consciousness so much easier to accept. There's often a mystery. How do we attract the Western devotee? These are the kind of things. Have to be, just sensitive and accommodating to them. Rabindra Swarup Prabhu put it very nicely. He said, when you first join the temple, you become a pure devotee. If you stay long enough, you become a human being.
There is one last question.
Last question. Okay.
Manish Prabhu, you want to go? Say the question.
Sure, Prabhu. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for the wonderful class. Prabhu, my question is, you're mentioning about keeping the patience, right, in progressing the Krishna consciousness, and you gave an example of like being slow and steady. But as the mind is very restless, right, sometimes it's really hard to follow that patience or develop that patience. and we want things quick, right? It could either be in a spiritual life or a material life, right? So can you give some examples, or maybe, I don't know if you have like a multi-step strategy or something like that to follow, how to develop that patience so that we can move steadily?
It's helpful to reflect on where we have come from in our spiritual practice, how we felt about life before taking up Krishna consciousness, and how Krishna consciousness has changed our lives. If we are grateful for that gift of Krishna consciousness, that contributes to us being patient. It's when we take it for granted that we become impatient. When we feel like, okay, I've got Krishna consciousness down, I've got Krishna in my back pocket, and I can go on to other things. I've always got Krishna in my back pocket. Then we have succumbed to that impatience and that desire to have more diverse, intense experiences of other kinds. Krishna consciousness is Shuddha Sattva. It's not only the mode of goodness, it's the mode of purified goodness. And the mode of goodness is characterized by that contentment with the present moment. The mode of passion makes us think about the future. The mode of ignorance makes us lament about the past. So the mode of goodness means being present in the moment, being present with what's before us, and being not only present, but content with that. If we have that understanding of contentment and the mode of goodness, so many problems and contrary things that inevitably arise will just kind of wash off us more easily. Be chill. Will be unaffected. Isn't this what the Gita says over and over again? You know, matra sparshastu kaunteya sitoshna sukha dukkha. So the short answer to your question is to be grateful for Krishna consciousness, to appreciate the rare opportunity that we have, and to treasure it and cherish it and nurture it by careful, attentive chanting of the holy names. All the good qualities, such as patience, will arise if we attend to our foundational spiritual practices. And the older you get, the easier it is to be patient. That is something I have experienced, at least patient with the big things. You can become grouchy with the little things, impatient. But the big things, you think, okay, I understand it's going to take some years for this to manifest in this person. It's going to take some years for this quality to be matured in myself. It's going to take some years for me to realize this particular ambition that I have. Okay, that's all right. I'm making a little progress every day, like that. So time is on our side if we're chanting Hare Krishna. We'll become more patient as we age. All right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu. So nice to be here with you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.